Greetings, athletes. Scott Beasley here, checking in with some quick advice and thoughts on training transitions. Not the literal transitions that we go through as do athletes and triathletes in races, but rather the seasonal transition as we move from winter to spring, as well as what for many of us will be a change from preseason to what might be referred to as peak season training. So there are a couple of considerations when we talk about this. The first that we'll discuss is pertaining to training load, so the amount of work that your body is experiencing. And the second pertains to the actual areas that we're training in, be it inside or outside, and how we safely make that transition. So let's jump in. The first concept that we need to define is this idea of training load. So training load, as I mentioned, is the stress that your body experiences. It's a function of not just training volume, which many of us focus on. It's what we talk about when we're hanging out in our groups. No one says, how much time did you spend in Zone 4 this week? All your friends want to know, how many hours did you log on the bike, or how long was your long run this week, right? So that's part of it, the training volume, but it's also a function of the intensity of work that you're doing. Those of you that are math types, you can think of it as an equation of training load equals quantity times quality, where we're talking about hours in the saddle, hours running, hours in the pool, hours in the weight room, multiplied by the intensity that we put out during those sessions, right? And this is intuitive. A 90-minute bike ride when we're just kind of easing in the saddle, doing zone 1, zone 2 work, maybe isn't that big of a deal. Versus if we were to sprinkle in a 3 by 12-minute work set, where each of those 12-minute sets is a zone 4 heart rate standing or seated climb, that's a whole different level of intensity and a whole different workout. So why this is relevant this time of year is because many of you will be experiencing what might be perceived as significant increases in your training load. These increases will come in the form of time and the quantity of work that you're doing. So let's say, as an example, throughout the winter, your long training week consisted of a 2-hour bike ride as part of an all-around 7 hours worth of training. When the weather breaks, we might jump that up and dive right into a 3 or 3.5 hour bike ride as part of 9-hour work week, including cardio. So at a glance, this might seem like a significant increase, but it's really not. And I know the popular literature tells us that we need to start at a certain point and just have these neat little 10% increases as we move along week to week. But the reality is our body doesn't function that way. Our body doesn't know the rule of 10%. Our body only knows the stress we put on it. So if we have had a higher intensity training plan throughout the winter in the form of speed workout and weight training, when we back away from some of that, we're able to increase the amount of work that we're doing. So again, intensity down, volume up, minimal effect on overall training load, all right? And how this will play out for most of you, particularly the performance-oriented athletes, as opposed to those of you who are here for more general fitness that are using triathlon as that tool. But if you're going for performance, your weight training will all but go away pretty soon here. If you have been going at it hard for 2 to 4 relatively heavy lifting sessions per week, what you might find is that going forward, we're going to cut that back, and you might have maybe a pair of 10 to 20-minute stability workouts, just kind of working in along the hip, knees, and abdominals and low back, just working on some of those stabilizing muscles to prevent injury, but nothing of a high intensity. So again, as the weight training moves out, higher intensity comes in. And intuitively, this should make sense. If you started your Saturday doing several sets of squats and lunges and hip workout and then hopped on the bike for 90 minutes, that has a whole different feeling than when you just wake up fresh, do no strength training, and then get in the saddle and go put the time in. So that's where that's coming from. So if you have questions on that, let me know. Now, at the same time, there's one exception to where it might make sense to have a big bump up in training like that, and that is when we make the transition from indoor training to outdoor training. Going from the bike trainer and the treadmill to the open road is a whole different thing, and we need to respect that. Indoors, when we're on the bike trainer, I know 2 of you use rollers, which is wonderful, but by and large, everyone else I coach uses a simple bike trainer of some variety or another. Well, when your bike is locked in that trainer, you don't need to use the stabilizing muscles in and around your trunk and pelvis. it's held in and the trainer does all the work for you there. So when we go outside, not the case. Similarly, when you're on the treadmill, everything occurs in a perfectly straight plane. There's no stress on the ankle or the knees or the hips, and it actually gives you a little bit of cushion. When we transition outside, particularly in the spring when the asphalt is still pretty hard and frozen and doesn't have that spring back for us, we need to be aware of that and make sure that we're not causing any trauma to the body. So what that means is if you are looking at your schedule and then you're looking at the weather report and you notice that this is the week that you're going to make the shift from outside, probably a bad example. I know the weather's horrible in the Midwest and it's still nice and dark in the other regions where you guys are training. But let's say that that week comes and you're looking at your schedule and you're going to make that first big ride outside, and this is the week where you take that big jump up in training. Well, I'm going to encourage you to actually back that off and just kind of ignore what's in the schedule. You don't need to call me at midnight the night before your ride. You don't need to check in. Just do the right thing. You know what's right for your body. Obviously, if you have questions, drop a line. But we want to make sure that you actually don't make that big jump up when you're changing modalities, going from inside to out. So whatever your long distance session was indoors, that should be at for sure the longest you go outside, and you might even want to take a good chunk of that time off for that first outdoor ride and outdoor run. Again, just to see how the body responds and how it reacts to having to draw in all those stabilizing muscles and go on a surface that's much less forgiving than what it might be on the treadmill and in your trainer in the basement. So those are the thoughts as we make the transition, hopefully sooner than later, to outdoor training here. So again, don't be alarmed by the big jumps in the training volume, as your training load will remain relatively consistent, but ignore that completely in terms of those jumps in cardio when you are making the transition outside. So that's all I got for you right now. Train safe out there. I am on my way back to the States, so hopefully I'll be seeing most of you face to face sooner than later. Train smart.